Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's Easy Dharma for Difficult Times. I'm Pastor Niral Patel. I'll be taking you through today's session. Now, our Easy Dharma for Difficult Times sessions run at 9 p.m. on the Kachara Facebook page, and the sessions are led by either myself or by Pastor David Lai. Now, we're covering different topics. The topics that I'm going to be covering is actually the Four Noble Truths. So I did the first one on Monday, the Monday just gone. So if you haven't seen it, you can watch it on Kachara's Facebook page again. And it's also available on Kachara's YouTube page as well. Now, the topic that I wanted to discuss with all of you is the Four Noble Truths. And what are the Four Noble Truths? The Four Noble Truths are actually the fundamentals of Buddhism. All of Buddhist practice is based on these Four Noble Truths. So on Monday, I actually went over the first Noble Truth, which is that there is suffering. And today I'll be going over the second Noble Truth. And in the subsequent sessions after this, I'll be going over the third and the fourth. So again, the Four Noble Truths, what are they? The first is that there is suffering. And this is something that a lot of people don't actually, they might understand it intellectually, but when it actually comes to day-to-day practice, it's not something that they live by. The second is that there is cause to suffering, which is what I'm going to be going over today. And the third is that all suffering has an end. And the fourth is that the way out of all of this suffering is to practice the path to enlightenment or self-transformation. Okay, so let's just see who has joined us today. Okay. One of the things that I wanted to mention about the Four Noble Truths is that the Four Noble Truths and understanding them is actually the key to self-transformation. When you understand the Four Noble Truths and when you live by them, you actually transform the way you think. Now, when you transform the way you think, you're actually able to improve your life to be better. Okay? You use these Four Noble Truths and the understanding of them to better yourselves and to better your life. Hello, Yinping, and hello, Benkui. Nice to see you here. So to get started, for those of you who are already online, what I wanted to ask is, if you did see the session that I did on Monday, it was all about we are suffering. So what I want you guys to do today, which is actually going to tie in with the second Noble Truth that I'm going to be talking about, is I want you in the comment section to describe some sort of suffering that you're going through now. Okay? And then what I'm going to do a little bit later on is I am going to explain where that suffering comes from, which is obviously the second Noble Truth. So one of the things that people are suffering with now is that we're in the movement control order, in Malaysia at least, and in other parts of the world we're all under lockdown due to the coronavirus. Now, tying in with what Pastor David was talking about yesterday during his session, which he actually covered the psychology of boredom, what makes us bored. And this is actually a suffering that a lot of people are facing today during this time, because they are actually indoors and they can't usually go out to do what you normally would want to do, like go to a restaurant, go out and eat with friends, or maybe you want to go to the cinema, or maybe you want to go to the gym, just something that you do on a day-to-day level. Now, because at the moment we can't actually do that and we're stuck inside, we're stuck indoors, because we don't have the ability to do that. A lot of us are getting bored. Now, what Pastor David actually talked about yesterday is the reason that we get bored is because we're actually attached to doing these things. We're attached to socializing. We're attached to going out. We're attached to going to the restaurant to have a meal with our family and our friends and talking and conversing. And similarly, you can be attached to going to the gym, to working out. You can be attached even to shopping. A lot of people enjoy going shopping a lot. Now, when you don't get that, when you don't fulfill that attachment, you suffer. And the suffering comes in the form of, it's actually quite an emotional state. It's an emotional suffering because this suffering isn't actually physical. Even today, for us now, we're indoors, okay? But most of us are not physically suffering. What most of us are going through is actually an emotional suffering. And this comes about because of what Pastor David was talking about yesterday. We're not able to fulfill our attachment. And actually what Pastor David talked about yesterday with attachment actually ties in with what I'm going to talk about today, which is where suffering comes from, how suffering arises. Hello to Chung. Hello to Pastor Jinai. Hello to Cynthia. Glad that you could join today. So again, if you've just joined, today's session is actually going to be about the second of the Four Noble Truths. So the first noble truth was that there is suffering, and today's session is going to be about where that suffering comes from. Okay, so if you do have any ideas or any comments about my previous session, which I talked about, we are suffering and suffering in some form, please do put it in the comment section and I will actually talk about it and where it comes from. So actually, what I want to do now is, I think I will actually get into the second noble truth, that suffering comes from somewhere. Every time we go through an experience in life, every time we are happy, every time we are sad, all of this has a cause. And the cause is something that we know as the law of karma, or the law of cause and effect. So in brief, in short, in a very simple explanation of what karma actually is, it is basically that if you do a good deed, something good will happen to you in the future. And if you do a bad deed, something bad will happen to you in the future. Actually, it's a lot more complex than this, but it's not something that I'm going to get into today. I'm not going to get into that now, okay? However, bringing that to an example now, okay? A lot of people are asking, from a karmic perspective, why is it that we are suffering now, okay, during this period of the coronavirus around the world? And I'm going to answer this question not in the sense of those people who actually have the virus. I'm going to answer this question in the sense of people who don't have it, but we actually think we're suffering because maybe we're in a country where we're indoors and there is a movement control order or other such measures if you're joining us from anywhere else around the world. Now, as I was saying, everything that happens to us happens because there is a cause. Now, usually we think of that individually, but you can also think of that in a group. So when you think about that in a group situation, a good example would be us in needing to stay indoors right now. We're a group. It's basically the entire human race, or the majority of it, or a large proportion of it, that is now indoors. And we are suffering because we're bored. Okay? So where does that come from? Why is it that such a large group of people are now under the same circumstances and suffering in the same sorts of ways? And the reason is that there are actually multiple forms of karma. Now, when we think about karma, we usually only think about it in individual terms. So, for example, if something bad happens to me, I probably did something earlier on in this life or in previous lives to create that cause. But karma, you see, is actually much more complex than that. Karma actually covers groups as well. So in the past, we've all been in a situation where we have actually generated the karma to be in the same exact situation now. So even though we think that we're the only ones suffering because we're indoors, and usually we're quite egotistical in the sense that we only usually think about our own suffering, everyone else around us is also going through the same sort of situation, whether it be our family that are in our homes with us, or maybe even your neighbors. Everybody in the country is going through the exact same thing. So this is on a group level, but also on an individual level. You might even notice that your suffering might be in different ways. For example, some of us might have an attachment to shopping. So when that attachment is not being fulfilled, we start to suffer. On the other hand, some of us actually indoors at the moment might actually enjoy being indoors and might actually enjoy things like reading or watching TV, or perhaps even watching those movies that you always wanted to watch but you never got around to watching. So for them at this precise moment, they're not suffering. Okay? So karma and suffering actually differs between one person to the next. Okay, I've seen some other people just join as well, so hello to you, and welcome. I'll be explaining the Four Noble Truths today, and especially the second noble truth, which is there is suffering. Now, what I was talking about is karma. Karma is actually the cause of any sort of suffering that we go through. Okay, but how does karma itself come about? Which is a very good question. Now, karma comes about when the word karma actually, let me explain. The word karma literally means action. So when you do any action, whether it is physical, it is verbal, or it is even mental, what happens is you generate what is known as karma. Okay? But what leads you to make a particular action? Okay? So in Buddhism, this is called the three poisons. We call it the three poisons. It is just a name of a grouping of three particular things.
There's a question from Kok Yun Nom.
Oh, there is?
Yes. Our current state of suffering.
Yep.
You see it?
No, it doesn't come up.
Our current state of suffering is the result of what we have created before. I think we need to realize this cause and effect before we can take steps to reduce our suffering. Is this logical? Is this logical?
Is this logical?
Yeah.
Yeah. Actually, you've hit the nail on the head there, which is something that I'm going to be talking about. So, in this case, to answer to prove what you actually said is right, when you know the effects of a particular action that you make, you're able to stop yourself from being within the bounds of negative karma. Okay, let me explain that and elucidate that a little bit more. Okay, so for example, if you understand, for example, I'm just going to take a very, very out there and action, for example, killing. Okay, if you know that if you kill somebody, Okay, yes, in our day and age, in our modern society, if you do kill somebody, there are going to be secular repercussions for you. Okay, you are most probably going to end up in prison for many years for killing somebody. Okay, so those are the kind of social repercussions of the act of killing. But you see, with any action, you have the immediate social, physical results of it, but you also have the spiritual results of it. Now, the spiritual results of karma actually lead you to, in this particular case, sorry to say, when you pass away, you would actually take rebirth in one of the lower realms. Okay? And then once you take rebirth again in another life, maybe as a human, you will also have to bear the consequences of the act of killing. For example, somebody may kill you in that particular life. Okay, so this is a very brief example of how karma actually works. Okay, that's from the negative side of it. Okay, I'm going to go on a positive side of it, because usually when we talk about karma, we only usually concentrate on the negative, but actually karma is positive as well. You do have positive karma. And the positive karma that I want to talk about is generosity. Now, if you are an extremely generous person in this life, okay, maybe you actually don't get anything back for being generous. You're just a naturally kind-hearted person, or even if you're not, but you train in generosity and you actually give to other people. In future lives, this actually creates the conditions, okay, the karmic conditions for you to actually have a lot of resources. Okay, it is the opposite of being miserly. So a lot of people say, why is it that in this life some people are poorer and some people are richer? Now, it may not seem fair, and it isn't, but that is the way that karma works. In this sense, the people who are richer or have more physical resources actually practiced a lot of generosity in previous lives. Okay? So this is the karmic result of having practiced generosity. So you can see that whether it is a negative action or whether it is a positive action, there will always be a result to it. Okay? But you see, Buddhism doesn't stop there. Buddhism goes deeper in its explanation, because Buddhism wants to get out of karma completely. Okay? So when you reach enlightenment, you are no longer bound by your negative karma, but you're also no longer bound by your positive karma because you've exhausted it completely. If we are in the throes of karma, whether positive or negative, you're actually bound to cyclic existence, which means taking rebirth again and again and again and again and again. Okay? Buddhism goes one step further. Buddhism tries to get to the root of the problem, or the root of how karma is created, and that is what is known as the three poisons. So first is ignorance, the second is attachment, and the third is hatred. Now, if you take any action, okay, any action that you do, it is ultimately going to be based upon one of these three. Okay? So, coming back to our particular situation, yesterday Pastor David was talking about boredom and the psychology behind it, and how you're bored when your attachments are not fulfilled. Okay? So in this sense, you can see that because maybe we're attached to going out, to hanging out with our friends, we're attached to going to the cinema, we're attached to going for nice meals or having nice food, when we don't get it, we suffer. Okay? So you can see that the suffering that we're actually facing now, or the boredom in this case that we're facing now, because we're all stuck indoors, is actually due to attachment. Okay? So this is a really good example of that the three poisons actually cause your suffering. Okay? So when you're attached to something, okay, per se it is not negative. There's nothing negative about going out and having a meal with your friends. But there is when you over exaggerate its good qualities. And then when you don't get it or it doesn't meet your expectations, you start suffering. So here, that is when it becomes negative. Yeah.
Question.
Okay, question.
This is from Bing Hui.
Yeah.
It's a very short one. Could being rich also be a result of negative karma? Just repeat the question.
Okay, so there's a question from Ben Kui. She's asked if being rich can also be a result of negative karma. Okay, now the example I gave earlier is if you practice generosity, then the results of that in the future will actually be in that you have enough resources, enough material resources, and you would be rich per se. Now, Ben Kui asked, can being rich also be due to negative karma? And actually, the answer is yes. Okay? Now, let me explain that. When you, in this case of being rich being due to negative karma, what it actually happens is maybe in a previous, due to a previous action, it actually creates the causes for you to have a lot of money. But the way in which you use that money and those resources that you get are due to, okay, let me explain this in a better way. Okay, there's two parts to this. Okay, the first is the original action that leads you to be rich. Okay, but it also ties in with the next part of it. Okay, which is what you do with that money and those resources once you get it. Okay, now it ties in. So perhaps in the original instance, you did something positive. Scratch that. So you did something negative, okay? This actually leads you to have a lot of money, okay? But once you have this money, okay, you can actually do something more negative. You can actually use it a lot. You can actually use it to the point of maybe hurting yourself or hurting your family emotionally or physically, or even hurting other people, just using it for the sake of using it rather than using it for any purpose. Now, why is this connected and how does this actually connect? It connects because the original action actually leads you to do more negative action. It leads you to do more negative karma. And this is not something that I wanted to touch on, but Ben Kui, thank you. Your question actually brings this up, and it ties in very well with the second of the Noble Truths, is that karma multiplies, okay? And the way that karma multiplies, okay, is actually your frame of mind, okay? So, for example, in this case, okay, I'll take another case. I'll use another example. I'll go back to the example of killing because I know it's extreme, but it will demonstrate the point very well. You undertake the act of killing. Now, this not only leads you to suffer from killing in the future, from the karmic effects of killing in the future, but what it does is it actually plants what we call a seed or an imprint in your mind. When that seed or that imprint is in your mind, what happens is the next time that you're in a situation, it will actually be easier for you to kill. Okay? Because you have an imprint of having done that action in the past. So it's easier for you to do. So for example, in this life, I'll kill somebody, maybe just one person, but in my next life, I take rebirth, and it's easier for me to do it because I have that imprint, I have that seed in my mind, I have that sort of karmic memory, you can call it, of having killed. So it's easier for me to kill. And as I progress on and further and further and further, because it becomes easier and easier and easier for me to actually kill, I suffer more and more and more and more and more. Okay? This actually applies to the same situation that Ben Kui was talking about. If being rich can also be the result of having negative karma, and the reason is yes, it can be, because the situation that arises of you having money or having resources can lead you to do more negative actions. Okay? It comes about because of negative actions and also provides the conditions for you to do more negative actions. Okay? If this isn't clear, please do ask on the questions. Okay, so, well, okay, this covered quite a bit of karma. So we've done the positive karma and we've done the negative karma and how it leads to suffering. And we've actually also talked about it just now with Ben Kui's example, is actually talked about multiplying as well. Okay, so you get to it and you have these results and you have this suffering. But let me go back to the example that of boredom. Okay, it comes back to one of the three poisons, which is, in this case, is attachment. But it can also be one of the other two, which is ignorance, or it can also... These three are what Buddhism says we need to get rid of, or we need to at least keep in check before we can actually enter personal transformation. Before we can actually transform ourselves, we need to understand these three things and how they actually lead us to suffer. These three, ignorance, attachment, and hatred, cause us to act, to do various actions. And these actions cause karma. This karma itself is what makes us suffer. Okay, so that is, in essence, what I wanted to talk about today. For some reason, I don't see any more comments. I don't even see the previous questions, but
maybe you want to. Do you think you want to talk about merits in this instance? Up to you.
Okay, so the question is, where do merits come into this? Okay, this is something that I will actually talk about more in the fourth session, which has to do on the path out, but I will mention it briefly here. Now, in Buddhism, we always say that we need to do two things. We need to purify our negative karma, and we also need, or just karma in full, whether it's positive or negative, just purify it. And we also need to generate merit, or it's a spiritual energy called merit. Now, the difference between the two, okay. I talked about earlier that all of the results of our actions are always due to karma. But from a spiritual sense, if you've been a spiritual practitioner, we can also benefit from a type of energy called merits, okay? Now, this differs from karma. Because you see, karma not only multiplies, karma can also be exhausted, okay? For example, you can engage in purification practices like Vajrasattva or the 35 confessional Buddhas, or even Dharma protector practice also has elements of purification of negative karma as well. When you engage in those practices, what happens is the karma is purified in the sense that you don't receive the full effects of a particular karma. Okay, so let me explain that a bit. I'm going to take the example of being in a car accident. Okay, so you have the karma to be in a car accident. And the karma is such that when you do get into the accident, you'll actually be quite badly hurt. If, however, you are practicing purification practices, and over time, and if you do have a daily practice which includes this element in, then over time what happens is that karma is purified in the sense that you don't have to bear the effects of the full karma. So what this means is, now that you've been doing your purification practices and you get into a car accident, maybe it is not that bad. Maybe you don't actually come away injured at all. Maybe someone just bumped you from the back and that was it. You see, you still have to experience the effects of the karmic actions that you've performed previously, but the extent of which you do can be purified, it can be lessened. Okay? On the other hand of it, when we do spiritual activities and when we actually transform our minds to become better people, more compassionate, more kind, and engage in spiritual practices, you generate an energy that is known as merit. Now, this energy is always beneficial. It always benefits you. It's never going to be negative, okay? It's always going to be positive. Now, merit itself, this type of energy, cannot be exhausted. You can't get rid of it, okay? Once it's created, it is always there. It is always there for you to tap into until you actually reach enlightenment, okay? So, this is in brief the difference between karma and merit.
Question. Kok Yuan Lam asks if are merits generated from virtuous actions with a pure mind or without agenda?
Okay. Kok Leon Lam asked, are merits generated from virtuous actions with a pure mind without agenda? Now, the question you've asked is actually a very good one. Now, we say when we want to generate merits, we should have a very virtuous mind at the beginning, before we undertake any action, and then at the end, you also have a virtuous mind, okay? So the way that this happens, I'm going to make it very simple, is on a practical level, before you do anything that you want, that's a merit-generating activity, you take refuge and you generate compassion, okay? Basically, you set your mind to be as virtuous as possible. Then you actually perform the action, and then at the end of it, you do a dedication. Now, what is a dedication? Dedication is actually a reminder of your virtuous, of setting a virtuous goal, okay? It is also a rejoicing of something virtuous that you have done. So you can see that on either side of the action, you do have a virtuous mind. You generate a virtuous mind, okay? Now, for most people when they're starting out practicing, okay, maybe you're, I don't know, feeding the homeless, okay? So you want to turn that into a merit-making activity. So you generate a virtuous mind before and you do a dedication afterwards, okay? Now, when you start off, you will generate merit. That is for sure. But there is a difference between somebody who generates merit when they're starting off and somebody who has been practicing for a longer time, okay? The reason is because the person who is starting off, because you only set your virtuous motivation, your virtuous mind at those 2 points before and after the action, the merit you generate is less compared to a person who has actually been practicing for a longer amount of time and it actually has a virtuous mind throughout most of the day, who is always thinking about benefiting other people, whose virtuous mind is actually encompasses more of their day than just a particular action.
Vingui asks, example of current suffering, being worried about how elderly parents are doing when they are far away and alone during the MCO. Oh, I think that's not a question. Next one is Yu Sing.
Okay.
Master, we've created a cause for the group karma we're experiencing now, COVID, in brackets. Do we have to suffer this in its entirety? Can just a section of people doing prayer significantly reduce this group karma that has opened up?
Okay, we've got a good question from Ang Yu Sang. Pastor, we've created the cause for the group karma we are experiencing now, which is COVID. Do we have to suffer this in its entirety? Can just a section of people doing prayers significantly reduce this group karma that has opened up? It's a very, very, very good question. Now, you see, because we have this group karma. Now, there are actually multiple ways to actually lessen this group karma, and it doesn't necessarily just rely on doing spiritual practices, okay? You see, that karma is you can exhaust karma by actually doing physical actions as well as spiritual actions. Okay, so we are in this group together, and we do have people unfortunately suffering around the world that they do have this virus. And at the same time, we also have people suffering as well because we're indoors all day. Now, in this case, what is happening is because there are now, what the governments are now doing is are now implementing movement control orders in Malaysia and throughout the world. You are actually can, karmically speaking, reduce the span in which this particular karma has to affect us. Okay? Why? Because you're actually taking physical steps to avoid the result of the karma. So the result of the karma is the actual virus. Now we're actually taking physical steps to actually be indoors, to be safe, to be protected from this virus. But at the same time, it's not just about us when we're indoors. When we it is also about other people that we live with. It's also about our neighbors. It's also about the country. It's also about the other group that has, the other parts of the group that has this group karma. So you are actually already doing something that is contributing to lessening the full effects of the virus. Okay? So that is one part of it. The second part of it is the spiritual part of it. Now, when you do engage in purification practices, you can obviously reduce group karma. We can reduce the full results of karma. But when it comes to a large group, or even the entire world population, if you've only got, say, 1% of the entire population doing purification practices, okay, yes, it will have a karmic effect, but it is not going to cover the entire group. Okay? And there is a reason behind this. You see, when we talk about, or when we think about karma, we usually think about it on individual terms. But as I've explained, our current situation is also due to group karma. Now, the heaviness of group karma is actually a lot larger and a lot weighty than individual karma. Okay? So it will take quite a bit of purification to actually purify the group karma of, say, the entire population of Malaysia or anywhere around the rest of the world where there is the virus. So yes, it can. Yes, purification practice does work, but the weight that comes about due to group karma, the weight of group karma compared to the amount of individuals that are trying to purify that or praying for its purification is quite small. That being said, it does and will have an effect, because you can do spiritual practices to protect your family from yourself and your family from infectious diseases such as loma gyoma. Loma gyoma is known especially for helping to purify the karma to be affected by infectious diseases. Even though that might actually sound like it is it's not good news, but actually there is good news, because when you engage in something as a group, you engage in a measure, whether it's physical or it's spiritual, it does have an effect on karma. So in this case, actually just being under the movement control order that the government has implemented, we are actually reducing the full effects of that the coronavirus can actually affect everybody in Malaysia or the world. When you do that, even though most people don't think about it, that is actually a measure to contain the karma of the coronavirus. So that was a very good question. Thank you for asking it. Okay, let's see who else we have. Hello to Louise, who's just joined, and Tang Kui Ha, and Valentina, and Keng Hoi Lee. Thanks for joining. Okay, now, okay, so some of some people have just literally joined, so I'm just going to basically recap what I've been talking about. So what I've been talking about is the second of the Four Noble Truths. And I covered the first Noble Truth on Monday, and I'll be covering the third on this Friday here on Kachara's Facebook page. Now, the second Noble Truth is that all of the suffering that we go through has a cause. And what I've been explaining is that the cause of this is actually karma. Now, where karma actually comes about is due to attachment, ignorance, and hatred. So any suffering that we go through in life at the moment is actually due to these three. Okay, so if there's any other questions, please ask them now. Otherwise, what I'll do is I'll recap again what the Four Noble Truths are, because they are very important for us. They are actually the foundational, it is the foundation of all Buddhist practice. So the Four Noble Truths are, once again, there is suffering. So basically, we all have a problem. We all have some form of suffering in our lives, and we actually need to identify and accept the fact first. The second is that all of this suffering comes from somewhere. And as I've been explaining today, it actually comes from our karma. And our karma is due to the three poisons: ignorance, attachment, and hatred. All of the actions that we take in life, usually, if it's not from a spiritual angle, is actually based on one of these three things. If you actually dig down and analyze your actions, you will see it comes from these three. The third Noble Truth, which I'm going to be talking about on Friday, is that all suffering ends. And then again, next week, I'll also be talking about the fourth Noble Truth, which is the path to escape all of this suffering, karma, which I've been talking about, and the attachments, and your ignorance and your hatred is actually to practice the path towards enlightenment. So once you reach enlightenment, you've transcended suffering completely. Okay? All right. Okay, I think that we'll end the session today there. If you do have any further questions or any comments about today's session, you can actually ask them and leave them on the comments, and I'll answer them during the next session. All right. Thank you for joining Easy Dharma for Difficult Times. Pastor David will be... No, actually, it won't be Pastor David. It will be me. I'll be again on Friday at the same time, 9 p.m. on Kachara's Facebook page. Thank you very much. Good night.